They say the Emperor's angels do not weep, that their gene-forged hearts are immune to grief, their minds purified of doubt. But in the silent chambers of the Primaris, where the air hums with the rhythm of artificial life, there are echoes that even the Omnissiah cannot purge, whispers of memory, of sacrifice, of men who no longer remember if they were ever truly human. Beneath ceramite and steel, beneath the glory of Ultramar and the shadow of Terra, beats a heart that was once mortal, remade, perfected, and burdened. The galaxy calls them saviors, demigods of war born from the Primarch's lineage. Yet within their souls burns a question no chaplain can sanctify. What is the cost of being remade? When Guilliman's miracle walked the stars again, it was said humanity had been given hope. But for the Primaris themselves, the first sons of Call's genius, and the Emperor's distant dream, hope became another weapon to wield, another lie to live. And as their brothers fell on distant worlds, the Primaris stood, stronger, faster, purer, and infinitely more alone. The burden of perfection is not freedom. It is servitude wrapped in glory. It is the unending trial of those who were reborn to save a species that no longer remembers their names. If you walk beside these warriors through the endless wars of the 41st Millennium, if you feel that same weight of duty, of sorrow, of beauty in the struggle, then stand with us. Lend your voice to this legion. Like, share, and subscribe, not for numbers, but for the remembrance of the lost and the eternal. The Emperor protects, but memory we must protect. The vault hums like a living heart, deep beneath the crimson crust of Mars, where sunlight is never reached and air moves like breath through a dying god's lungs. The vaults of Call stir. The air here tastes of iron, ozone, and something older like the ghost of a storm trapped within steel. Cables hang like arteries from the vaulted ceiling, pulsing faintly with blue current, feeding the rows upon rows of glass cylinders that line the walls. Inside each, suspended in viscous fluid the color of rusted blood, lies a shape too perfect to be human. A warrior forged, not born. Steam drifts through the aisles like drifting prayers, wrapping around the towering silhouette of Archmagos Dominus, Belisarius Call. His many limbs move with dissonant grace, servo motors whining softly as he passes between the incubation pods. His main cranial unit swivels, optical sensors flashing, while a dozen mechadendrites whisper their own calculations in binary. To watch him is to witness the sacred union of faith and abomination. Half priest, half machine, all purpose. And his purpose, his obsession, is awakening dot around him. Servitors shuffle on skeletal limbs, their faces smooth and expressionless beneath fox grills that stutter fragments of the Kant Mechanicus. Each one carries out a precise function, adjusting temperature, regulating nutrient flow, monitoring synaptic integration rates. The sound is hypnotic, a symphony of drips, hisses, and distant heartbeats echoing through steel. Somewhere above, perhaps kilometers beyond the crust, the forges of Mars thunder with the rhythm of war. But here, in these buried chambers, something quieter, far more dangerous, is being born. Call stops before one of the pods. Inside floats a figure larger than any mortal soldier, muscles sculpted to the edge of impossibility. His eyelids flicker. Tiny tremors ripple through his limbs. A spark of cognition fires in the darkness of his engineered mind. It begins as a pulse of light traveling through the fluider single neuron igniting end. Then another, and another, until the entire chamber throbs with golden luminescence. The data slates attached to the cylinder flare with life, runes cascading faster than human eyes can track. Call's vocoder crackles, distorted by reverence. Subject designation, Ultima pattern, neural lattice integrity complete. The Primaris stirs. Fingers flex like mechanical instruments rediscovering motion. The liquid vibrates with a low hum, as though the being inside is inhaling for the first time. His heart begins to beat not with warmth, but precision. He doesn't gasp or cry. There is no human chaos in his birth. Instead, the chamber releases its locks with a series of metallic sighs, and the glass splits apart. Fluid rushes downward, spilling across the floor like blood meeting the dust. The figure steps forward into the cold light. He towers, dripping in amniotic residue, his eyes twin embers, searching for meaning. There's no mother to welcome him, no brothers to embrace him only, the mechanical choir of the Mechanicus, reciting ancient litanies. Servo skulls circle above, recording the event for the Omnissiah's archives. The Primaris opens his mouth, but no sound comes. His voice has not yet been granted. From his throne of moving metal, Call watches in silence. To others, this moment would demand worship. To him, it is data proof of perfection, refined through 10 millennia of defiance. And yet, for all his logic, something in the creature's gaze unsettles him. It's not awe. It's not devotion. It's confusion. The spark of something dangerous awareness. The newborn soldier lowers his gaze. There, emblazoned across a nearby dais, shines the double-headed Aquila, radiant under crimson light. The symbol of the Imperium, the mark of the Emperor. It is meant to inspire reverence, to bind every servant of mankind to the same sacred obedience. But as the Primaris stares at it, his brow tightens. His hand trembles. Somewhere deep in his reconstructed DNA, echoes stir memories, not his own. Fragments of warriors who once bled for a dying god. Their defiance, their loyalty, their doubts all tangled in the code that birthed him. Call approaches, his mechanical limbs whispering across the steel. You are his work, he says, voice layered with static and wonder. You are the blood of the reborn, but the Primaris doesn't respond. His eyes, sharp and alien, reflect the Aquila as if seeing it for the first time and wondering what it truly means. For the first time since Call began his experiment, uncertainty enters the Archmagose's mind. Not a flaw of flesh or machine, but a flaw of soul. In the silence, the vault lights flicker. A deep tremor rolls through the walls, distant yet deliberate, like the planet itself exhaling. Servitors freeze mid-function. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, another pod hisses open, and for the first time in 10,000 years, Mars dreams again. The air inside the training vaults hums with voltage and incense. The tang of promethium clings to the recycled air, sweet and metallic, mingling with the rhythmic drone of the Mechanicus. Their voices rise and fall in Binharik, hymnscode, and prayer woven together, each note a plea to the machine god for purity in data, sanctity in flesh. Rows of the newly awakened stand at attention beneath the harsh light of lumen strips, their forms enormous yet uncertain, as if the act of existence itself still feels foreign upon their skin. They do not breathe like men. They regulate like engines. Yet somewhere inside the cold precision, something stirs. Alpha 7 blinks. His first memories are commands. His first sensations are pain and purpose. The trainers speak through vox grills, their words filtered into tone rather than meaning. Observe, endure, perfect. Around him, the others obey. Every movement measured, every strike identical. Their synchrony is beautiful and horrifying, dozens of giants moving as one organism, without hesitation, without doubt. But inside Alpha 7, there is a noise the others do not hear. It begins faintly, like static leaking through his neural uplink. Then it shapes itself into something older, a voice shouting a name that is not his. He flinches when the image comes, sand whipped by firestorms, armor the color of cobalt fractured by ash, a brother's laughter swallowed by the roar of a bolter. The vision dissolves before he can hold it, replaced by the sterile brightness of the manufacturing chamber. The servo skulls above hum as they record vitals, blind and unfeeling. He doesn't understand what he saw. He only knows it felt real. Too real, as days or perhaps weeks blur together. The tests intensify. Pain thresholds recalibrated. Reflexes pushed to the edge of inhuman precision. The instructors call it refinement, the sacred shaping of the Emperor's chosen. But Alpha 7 begins to notice fractures in the machine. One of his kin, Beta 3, hesitates during a combat drill. The error lasts a fraction of a second, barely noticeably, yet the response is immediate. Servitors descend, needles hissing, chemical obedience flooding the air. When Beta 3 rises, again, his eyes are empty glass. Alpha 7 watches. He feels the urge to speak, to ask, but no words come. His tongue feels like metal. His throat burns with silence. Instead, he buries the question beneath repetition, the sound of strikes, the rhythm of movement, the cold reassurance of routine. Yet even there, in that mechanical obedience, the cracks widen. Between cycles, when lights dim to mimic rest, he listens. The vault never truly sleeps. Machines whisper to one another through conduits in pulses of data speech, their voices faint but mocking. Sometimes he imagines they are laughing. Once, he hears his designation repeated back to him, not from a human voice, but from the circuitry itself. Alpha 7, Alpha 7. It echoes like a heartbeat in the steel. He reports it, of course. Calls overseers, run diagnostics. They find nothing. Residual psychic bleed, one Magos says, through a blur of mechanical tone. A trace of emotional static from legacy genomes. The explanation satisfies no one, least of all, Alpha. Legacy genomes. The phrase festers in him, like a secret he was never meant to know. Whose memories are these, trapped in his blood? One training cycle later, he dreams not the programmed hallucinations of combat simulation, but something raw. He stands on a battlefield of bones, watching a figure in gold turn away from him, faceless yet familiar. When he wakes, he finds his hands shaking. Around him, the others sleep in stillness, their bodies plugged into the nutrient lines, their dreams dictated by code. He is the only one breathing fast, the only one afraid. And then it happens. A flicker, just a flicker of light across the Gen Vault ceiling. The Vox network hisses, catches, and from somewhere deep within the manufactorum, a sound pierces the silence. Not mechanical, not programmed. It is a cry, a sound torn from lungs that should not yet know despair. Every servitor stops. Every lumen sputters. Even the chant of the priests falters mid-word. The sound fades almost as soon as it begins, swallowed by the endless hum of machinery. The Magi record it as unidentified audio interference. But Alpha 7 feels it burning through his chest long after. It wasn't interference. It was recognition. Someone or something was feeling. That night, when the lights dim once more, he stares at the wall and listens. Somewhere behind the metal, the machines are whispering again. Only now he can almost understand them, and for the first time, he wonders if the flaw they fear is not imperfection at all, but humanity. Fire blooms like revelation. The vault that once hummed with sterile control now roars with chaos-red light slashing through the dark, steam writhing like serpents in the air. The scent of promethium is everywhere, sweet and choking, layered over the ozone temps of charged plasma. Above the din, servitors chant in fractured voxtones, their voices merging with the shriek of pressure valves and the pounding rhythm of distant machinery. It is not training anymore. It is war, distilled to ritual. Alpha 7 stands at the edge of the proving ground, a circular arena of steel and smoke carved into the heart of the manufactorum. Around him, his brothers move in perfect unison, their armor unpainted but gleaming beneath the pulsing crimson lumen strips. Every strike, every parry, every motion is timed to the machine's heartbeat. Call watches from a raised observation platform, his form a silhouette of cables and glimmering optics. His voice, when it comes, is filtered through a chorus of Begin the sequence. The gates slide open. Target constructs, hulking mockeries of Xenos forms, stumble into the light. Their shapes formed of scrap and servolimbs, powered by barely contained machine spirits. The Primaris advance. Bolterfire erupts, thunder filling the confined space. Shells spark against metal, the recoil vibrating through the ground like a drumbeat of inevitability. The ritual is meant to test perfection under pressure, to burn weakness from the flesh. But for Alpha 7, every shot feels wrong. The noise blends into memory. Not his memory, but someone else's. A desert. A broken sky. The roar of a bolter older than he should remember. The sound of a name shouted across ruin one that has no place in his throat. The battle dissolves before his eyes, the shapes of his brothers shifting, their faces replaced by ghosts. He sees armor painted in colors he has never worn, bearing heraldry of chapters that no longer exist. One turns toward him, a phantom with his own eyes. We bled for a god who forgot our names, it whispers. Alpha 7 fires, the recoil tearing through his arm. The phantom falls, shattering into static. The world snaps back. The others continue unbroken, unbothered. Their movements perfect, their devotion immaculate, but he can no longer follow. His aim wavers, his breath stutters. He feels the weight of every stolen life coursing through his engineered veins. They are not new, he realizes. We are the echo of what was lost. Across the observation deck, Call's optics narrow. Data floods his screen's heart rates. Neural spikes, fragments of psychic instability. One of the Magi leans closer, whispering a question. Call's response is cold, calculated. Observation only. The anomaly may yield refinement. Down below, Alpha 7 falls to one knee. The servitors chant louder, their mechanical voices cracking under strain. Glory to the Emperor. Glory to the machine. The words hit like hammer blows, but they no longer sound holy. They sound desperate. The other Primaris march forward through fire and smoke, flawless in their precision, their eyes empty of doubt. Alpha 7 watches them, his brothers, his reflections, and sees not glory, but tragedy. Each one is built from death. Each one carries a memory that does not belong to him. They are patchwork saints, sculpted from bones of forgotten heroes. The realization breaks him. He drops his weapon. The metal hits the floor with a sound sharper than any scream. His hands tremble. Flames dance across the lenses of his eyes as he looks up at the sigil of the Imperial Aquila carved above the arena gate. It glows gold in the flickering light, a symbol of eternity, of faith beyond reason. But to him, now, it looks like a cage, a symbol of what they will never be, whole, alive, real. He kneels not in worship, but surrender. The motion is slow, deliberate, almost human. Around him the air stills. Even the servitors falter amid him, their vox grills clicking in confusion. Call leans forward, a dozen optical lenses focusing on the kneeling figure. For the first time in centuries, perhaps, he hesitates. The lights dim, the floor trembles. Somewhere deep within the vault, the machine spirits whisper through the conduits, their binary voices bleeding into something almost organic, something like mourning. The phrase repeats through the echoing chamber, faint at first, then unmistakable. The blood remembers. Alpha 7 lifts his gaze, and for a fleeting instant, the ghosts return not as illusions, but as presence. A legion of lost warriors watching through him, their memories carried forward in his flesh. The flames gutter. The vox chant dies. And in that silence, something ancient inside the machine exhales, as if acknowledging the truth. Perfection was never purity. It was only repetition. The hum of the vault deepens, a dirge beneath the mechanical noise, and the light of Mars flickers one last time against the steel walls. Smoke hung over the ruins like a shroud. The battle had ended hours ago, but the air still trembled with the memory of fire. You could taste the ash when you breathed, the bitter temps of promethium and blood fused into one. Distant thunder rolled from the bombardment lines beyond the hills, but here, among the broken stone and the dead, there was only the quiet rhythm of the dying. Servitors moved through the wreckage on clattering limbs, their mechadendrites slick with crimson, performing their grim work without pause or prayer. The orcs had been purged. The world was won, and yet no one felt victorious. Brother Sergeant Merrick knelt beside the shattered hull of a rhino. Its Imperial Aquila half melted, its machine spirit long since fled. His armor was scored and pitted, yellow dulled to ochre beneath layers of grime. Nearby, a figure approached, taller, broader, his armor gleaming like it had been forged that morning. A Primaris apothecary, his helm lenses glowing with cold blue light. The contrast between them was unbearable, one scarred by centuries of war, the other untouched by it, a weapon newly drawn from the forge. They met in silence. Merrick watched as the Primaris began his work, his auto-tools worry with mechanical precision. The wounded firstborn were lifted onto auto-stretchers, their vitals logged, their gene seed harvested with swift, clinical detachment. No prayers, no hymns, just data. Merrick's apothecary, an older brother named Solian, moved slower, his gauntlets trembling as he sealed a wound. Every motion was deliberate, reverent. His lips murmured the canticles of preservation, old words carried from the days when warriors still remembered why they fought. The contrast was a wound that neither side could speak of. For the first time, the silence between generations had weight. The Primaris were not cruel. They were not arrogant. But they were strangers in their own bloodline, brothers without ghosts. They bore no memory of the siege of Terra, of Horus, of the 10,000 years of penance that had shaped the Imperium's soul. They carried the Emperor's design, purified and perfected, but not his pain, and as they worked, that absence became a kind of violence, A wounded firstborn reached out to the Primaris tending him, his gauntlet streaked with oil and blood. "What chapter? Do you hail from sun?" he rasped. His voice was smoke and iron. The Primaris paused. "The Imperial fists," he answered, his tone flat, neither pride nor doubt. "Just statement." The veteran chuckled weakly, coughing through a cracked vox-grill. "No, you wear their colors. But you're not one of us. You're what's left of us." His breath rattled, each word a weight. "They built you from our ashes." The Primaris said nothing. He adjusted the med pump on the veteran's armor, his gauntlet slick with blood. The old warrior's hand rose, fingers brushing against the smooth ceramite of the Primaris's chestplate. "You've no scars," he whispered. "No memories. You'll fight well. You'll kill well. But you'll never remember why." The words struck deeper than any wound. For a heartbeat, the Primaris froze. Around him, the ruins crackled with residual heat, the wind moaning through the broken hulls of tanks. In his mind, perhaps by trick of guilt, or the machine's whisper, he thought he heard voices that weren't his own. Old battle cries. Names spoken in languages long dead. The ghosts of the gene seed. He blinked hard, trying to dismiss them, but they clung like static, faint and relentless. When he looked down again, the veteran was gone. The old warrior's hand had fallen, fingers curled against the dirt. The apothecary's instruments marked the time of death with a soft chime, cold and final. No ceremony followed. No litany of remembrance. The Primaris turned his gaze to the horizon, where smoke blurred into cloud. Behind him, Merrick approached, his voice low through the vox. "He fought in the iron cage," he said, "before you were thought of, before even your makers dared to dream you into being." He glanced at the Primaris's unstained armor. "You'll learn to carry ghosts eventually, brother. One way or another." But the Primaris didn't answer. He couldn't. His thoughts were a silence he couldn't fill. Not with faith, not with logic, not with duty. Only emptiness dot around them. The field became a tapestry of contrast, old and new, faith and function, devotion and design. The firstborn knelt in prayer beside their dead, reciting oaths older than memory. The Primaris catalogued the fallen with machine precision, sealing gene seed into containment vials before moving on. 2 generations of the Emperor's chosen, divided by the very perfection that was meant to unite them. As the sun sank into the smoke and the servitors began to chant the mechanical dirge of reclamation, the Primaris turned once more toward the lifeless veteran. The blood on his gauntlet had dried to rust, dark and flaking beneath the wind. He raised it slowly, staring at it, at the proof that something living had passed through his hands. Something older, something irreplaceable, and in the hollow quiet that followed, he finally understood what the veteran's smile had meant. It wasn't peace. It was farewell. The green tide came with the dawn. From the smouldering horizon, the orcs surged like a living storm, a wall of muscle, iron, and madness. Their war cries rolled through the shattered manufacturum fields, a guttural chorus that drowned out the crackle of burning promethium. The ground trembled beneath the weight of their charge, and every breath tasted of soot and fear. The sky above was torn apart by tracer fire, by the screams of dropships, by the roaring hymn of war that only the Imperium could sing. It was no longer a battle, it was a reckoning. The trenches had become graves. Firstborn and Primaris fought side by side, shoulder to shoulder, bolters roaring in perfect unison. For the first time, The divide between them vanished beneath the chaos. Brother Sergeant Merrick's voice growled through the vox, his tone iron and exhaustion. Hold the line. For dawn, for Terra. Beside him, the Primaris warrior, the same one who had once stood silent over the dying veteran, reloaded his bolt rifle with the precision of instinct, not thought. He no longer looked like a new creation. His armor was scorched, the purity seals half burned, his imperial aquila scored by shrapnel. The ash of the dead clung to him as if claiming him at last. The orcs broke through the first defense line. Prometheum tanks burst, bathing the world in sheets of blue flame. Merrick charged forward with a snarl, power sword blazing, his strike cleaving through greenskin flesh and crude iron armor alike. The Primaris followed, his movements fluid, brutal, almost desperate. For every orc that fell, another rose behind it, bellowing, grinning, endless. The air was thick with the stench of burning oil and blood. Bolter shells clattered against the mud like rain, and the cries of the dying became indistinguishable from the roar of the horde. A detonation hurled the Primaris backward, his vision fracturing into fire and dust. Through the smoke, he saw Merrick pinned beneath the twisted wreckage of a fallen dreadnought. The old warrior's armor was cracked open, golden light from his failing reactor leaking into the ash. Without hesitation, the Primaris ran to him, tearing through orcs with the ferocity of a man who had forgotten his limits. The dreadnought's frame was immovable, its machine spirit long gone, but still he tried, straining until his armor screamed in protest. Merrick's gauntlet caught his arm. "Leave it," the sergeant growled, blood bubbling through the vox grill. His voice was a death rattle wrapped in command. "The line needs you, not me." "I won't abandon you," the Primaris replied, his tone breaking for the first time. "You already carry us," Merrick said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "All of us. The sons that came before you. The wars we bled for. You are our shadow, our legacy, our proof." The orcs closed in again, crude blades flashing in the firelight. Merrick raised his pistol with one trembling hand and fired into the oncoming tide until it clicked empty. The Primaris rose to cover him, his bolter thundering, shells ripping through bodies that refused to fall. For a moment, one heartbeat suspended in eternity, they fought as brothers, indistinguishable in purpose. Then, with a sound like thunder splitting stone, the dreadnought's reactor went critical. The blast tore through the trench, scattering metal and bodies alike. When the dust cleared, only the Primaris stood. His armor was shattered, his helm torn away, blood streaking his face. Around him, the ruins burned with a cold, indifferent light. Merrick was gone, nothing left but a smear of gold and ash. His sword embedded upright in the mud like a grave marker. The orcs hesitated, sensing something had changed. The Primaris lifted Merrick's blade, its weight foreign yet familiar, and in that moment he understood. Legacy was not in the gene seed, not in the scars or memories, but in the act of remembrance, in carrying the dead forward, not as burden but as oath. He raised the sword high, its edge reflecting the dying sun, and roared a vow that needed no words. The tide broke against him. He moved through the horde like a storm given form, each strike a hymn, each breath a prayer. And though he bled, though his strength waned, there was no retreat. For in that ruin, among the corpses of both orc and man, something ancient stirred within him. Not a mutation, not an upgrade. A soul when the guns fell silent and the sky dimmed to ember, he stood alone amid the wreckage. The icons of the Imperium lay toppled, their gold reduced to dust, yet still they glowed faintly in the reflected fire. He looked upward, toward the heavens, where the Astronomicon's light flickered weakly across the void. Neither mercy nor condemnation, only the distant pulse of an empire too vast to grieve. He bowed his head. No prayer, no promise, just a quiet understanding. The firstborn were gone, but not forgotten. Their echoes lived in him, in every breath, every strike, every scar yet to come. The wind carried ash across his armor, dulling its once pristine surface until it matched the old. He let it settle there, a mantle of memory. And as the final light of the dying sun caught the curve of his blade, it was no longer the weapon of a new age. It was the inheritance of all that came before. The Imperium would endure, but only through remembrance. The war had ended days ago, yet the world still trembled, as if refusing to believe it. The silence that followed was not peace, it was aftermath. The kind of silence that presses against the skull and fills the lungs with the taste of dust and smoke. Once, this nameless city had been the beating heart of a forgotten imperial world. Now, its spires lay in ruin, their gilded arches blackened by orbital fire. The statues of saints had no faces. The stained glass no longer told stories. Only the faint, endless hum of broken vox units remained, whispering fragments of prayer into the void, static hymns for gods who did not answer. Through that graveyard of stone and steel walked the Primaris. They moved like ghosts, victorious yet hollow. Their armor gleamed under the dying light, unmarred by the filth that covered the streets, but their movements carried no pride. Even the air around them felt artificial, laced with incense, still burning from the last rites of the Astra Militorum, mingling with the scent of oil and ozone. It was the smell of faith turned mechanical, the smell of a victory that felt wrong. Brother Lieutenant. Varen halted before what remained of a chapel. The doors had been blown inward, their adamantine frames twisted like wax under heat. Inside, sunlight spilled through the shattered ceiling, cutting through clouds of drifting ash. The imperial aquila above the altar was split in two. One wing melted away, the other reaching upward as if clawing for salvation. Varen stared at it, the light glinting off his helm, and felt something stir that he could not name. It wasn't doubt, not quite, more like recognition, a reminder of something buried deep within him, a question that no gene seed could erase. The others moved past without pause. They had seen too many ruins, too many victories that looked like this. To them, it was routine. To him, it was revelation. His eyes, augmented, flawless, tracked the drifting motes of ash that twisted through the air like snowflakes. For a moment, he thought he saw faces in them, shapes of the fallen, echoes of those who had stood here centuries ago, whispering in tongues he did not understand. He blinked, they were gone. Only the dust remained. Outside, the world groaned. Massive servitors dragged the wreckage of tanks into piles, their vox grills hissing binary canticles to the omnis. Overhead, the blackened sky was streaked with the contrails of departing thunderhawks, each bearing the dead to orbit for reclamation or burning. A city reclaimed for the Imperium, yet it looked more like a mausoleum than a triumph. The banners of the Aquila fluttered weakly in the toxic wind, their edges frayed and dark with soot. Varrr Anne stepped into the chapel. His boots echoed against the marble floor, a sound that carried too far in the emptiness. The silence inside was thick, almost sentient. Even his armor's internal systems, the quiet hum of servos and cooling vents, seemed subdued, as though unwilling to disturb the air. On the altar lay a single candle, burned almost to its base. Somehow it still flickered, a thin, fragile flame fighting against the drafts that sighed through the broken walls. He stared at it, transfixed. The light cast a trembling halo across the cracked aquila, making the fracture shimmer like a wound that refused to close. He removed his helm. The air bit cold against his scarless skin. For the first time since the manufacturum vaults of Mars, he felt the weight of his own breath. He had fought through fire and void, slain monstrosities that defied reason, watched brothers fall in the Emperor's name, and yet here, in victory's quiet aftermath, he felt no presence watching, no warmth, no guidance. The Emperors were surrounded all things, that was what they were taught, but his warmth, his voice, it was nowhere. He tried to pray. The words came out hollow, recitations drilled into him through pain and ritual words without meaning. By the Emperor's light, I am his weapon. But even that felt false now. The silence answered him louder than any creed. Somewhere deep in the city, a distant explosion rumbled, a munitions cache finally giving up its ghost. The sound rolled through the ruins like distant thunder, deep and slow, echoing through the broken avenues and hollow towers. It felt almost alive, almost like a heartbeat. Varen turned one last glance at the dying candle. Its light sputtered, shrinking smaller and smaller until it was barely a spark. For a heartbeat, the reflection of that fragile flame danced across his visor, a solitary star against an endless dark. Then, with a final flicker, it went out. The chapel was left in shadow. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of burnt metal and sanctified ash. Somewhere beyond the ruins, lightning flashed across the horizon, pale, silent, and distant. And for a fleeting instant, the clouds took the shape of wings, a trick of the light, or a reminder that even shadows have their source. The chapel aboard the strike cruiser, Mercy of Solitude, was built for awe, not comfort. Its ceilings arched like the ribs of a giant, plated in burnished gold, its walls alive with the faces of saints long forgotten. Candles burned in regimented ranks, their wax dripping in perfect symmetry, filling the air with the thick scent of tallow and sanctified oil. The space echoed with the low, thrumming chant of the chaplain's voices rising and falling, like the grinding of old machinery. It was a sound that should have inspired devotion. Instead, it felt mechanical. Brother Lieutenant Varen knelt among his brothers, motionless as a statue, his armor polished to mirror perfection. The vox grills of the chaplains distorted their words, transforming human prayer into something colder, something stripped of breath and soul. Through his will, we are remade. Through his pain, we are preserved. The litanies pounded through the air like hammer strikes, each syllable measured, deliberate, precise. Around them, servitors drifted on piston legs, their flesh fused with machinery, their blank eyes reflecting the firelight as they polished relics and censers with flawless rhythm. Even the act of worship here had been mechanized. Every movement, every chant, executed with the sterile perfection of a system that had forgotten its purpose. Varen bowed his head. The incense stung his throat. The taste of oil hung heavy on his tongue, bitter and metallic. He tried to focus on the words, to let them carry him into the stillness that faith was supposed to bring. But the words fell flat, lifeless in his mind. They were data streams now, lines of code etched into his skull through centuries of genetic conditioning. He had been designed to believe, but belief, he realized, could not be engineered. A chaplain passed before him, his Crozius Arcanum burning with faint blue light. Through the black lenses of his helm, Varen saw only reflection, his own face mirrored back in warped steel. "Brother," the chaplain intoned, "faith is the engine of man." His voice, amplified through his vox grill, crackled with static. It sounded almost like mockery. "Without faith, we are only flesh. Remember this." The chaplain moved on, and the echo of his words seemed to linger, bouncing off the golden walls like a threat. The service continued, a storm of sound and ritual. Banners bearing the sigil of the Imperial Aquila swayed in the recycled air, their edges blackened by the residue of war. Above the altar, a servitor clicked through the motions of the rite, its mechanical arm raising a censer in flawless imitation of reverence. The sight made Varen's stomach twist. He wondered if the Emperor saw this theater of devotion. If he could hear the words of men who prayed like machines, or if the throne consumed not just his strength, but his attention as well. He tried again to pray. Quietly, not the rote verses drilled into him since creation, but something else, something small, fragile, real. "If you can hear me," he whispered beneath the thunder of hymns, "then tell me, do you still look upon us?" His voice broke against his lips. There was no answer, only the hum of ventilation, the soft whir of servos, the endless repetition of perfection without soul. That was when the rumor found him. It came from the lips of a battle brother kneeling nearby, his voice little more than a breath through the vox. "They say the Astronomicon flickers," the warrior murmured. "Not from decay, from hunger." Varen turned, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" But the other warrior did not answer. His focus returned to the altar, his lips moving in the same lifeless rhythm as before. The words haunted Varen's mind. Hunger, he knew, the Astronomicon was powered by the Emperor's will, that its light guided ships across the void. But if it was flickering, if it was hungry, then what was it consuming? What price was being paid for their faith? For their resurrection? For him? The thought took root like rot beneath armor. It grew each time he knelt, each time the chaplains shouted their prayers through broken vox grills, each time the servitors wiped blood from relics that had not known a living touch in millennia. He began to change his prayers. Slowly, carefully, no longer recitations, but confessions. Questions whispered into the void. Why was I made? What do you see when you look at us? He never expected an answer, but sometimes in the silence between hymns, he felt something stir, not warmth, not guidance, but the cold weight of awareness, as if something vast and unseen regarded him from beyond the veil, watching, measuring, waiting. Tonight, as the ceremony reached its crescendo, he did something forbidden. As the others bowed, helmets locked in reverence, Varen reached up and disengaged the seals of his own. The hiss of released pressure cut through the chanting. He lifted the helm from his head and let the raw air strike his face. The smell of incense, blood, and burnt metal filled his lungs. He stared at the altar, at the golden effigy of the Emperor, eyes blank and eternal, and for a single heartbeat he felt utterly unseen. No voice, no presence, only the void. And in that silence, something within him finally cracked. The world below the strike cruiser was a wasteland of devotion. What had once been a hive city now resembled an open wound, craters filled with ash, spires shattered into jagged teeth. And yet the pilgrims came. They came by the thousands. Some crawled on hands and knees through mud blackened by promethium burns. Others staggered beneath relics too heavy for their bodies, whispering prayers that bled from their throats in broken syllables. The air trembled with hymns, 10,000 voices chanting in unison, a sound so vast it seemed to shake the heavens themselves. From orbit, perhaps, it would look like a rebirth. Down here, it felt like a burial. Brother Lieutenant Varin stood among the ruins, armor gleaming like a false sunrise amid the dust. Around him, his fellow Primaris formed a wall of ceramite and discipline, their visors reflecting the flicker of rebuilding fires. They watched as pilgrims carried sacred icons to the center of the devastations, sigils of the imperial Aquila, fragments of old shrines, bones of saints encased in glass. Each movement followed the rhythm of an invisible machine. Step, bow, lift, pray, again and again, perfectly synchronized. It should have been beautiful. It should have inspired awe. But all Varin could feel was the grinding of gears beneath the illusion of faith. The reconstruction had begun days ago, guided by the ecclesiarchy and its tireless service. Towering cranes, draped in purity seals, lowered slabs of stone onto foundations laced with incense smoke. Server skulls drifted through the dust, reciting verses of the imperial creed in shrill, looped vox recordings. Their voices merged into a wall of sound that drowned out thought. The scent of burning oil, the clatter of machinery, the endless rhythm of prayer, it all became one pulse. One heartbeat of something too vast and impersonal to be called holy. Varin found himself whispering beneath the roar, words that were not part of any sanctioned liturgy. "Is this worship," he murmured, "or manufacture?" The question died in the air, smothered by the noise. One of his brothers, Sergeant Maltran, turned slightly, the movement precise, wary. "You speak too softly, brother," he said through his voice. "Either speak with faith, or not at all." His tone was not cruel, merely certain, as if certainty itself were armor. But certainty no longer fit Varin like it once had. It hung loose, ill-fitting, a relic of another self. He watched a child kneel before the incomplete shrine, her face streaked with soot. She pressed her small hands together and whispered to the Emperor, her voice trembling. A servitor approached behind her, its mechanical limbs sweeping ash from the marble base with mechanical care. The child didn't notice. She prayed to a silence that had never answered. Varin felt something in his chest tighten. For a moment, he envied her ignorance. Then he realized it was not ignorance. It was surrender. Later, when the last block of the shrine was set into place, the chaplain came. His armor was black and gold, his croziest gleaming like a weaponized star. The crowd parted as he passed, their chants rising into frenzied praise. When he reached the altar, he raised his arms and his amplified voice rolled like thunder. "Faith is not a question," he roared. "It is the breath that sustains us. To doubt is to die." His words ignited the mob. Pilgrims screamed blessings, tearing strips of cloth from their own robes to wave as banners. Even the servitors paused their motion, as if the machine spirit within them recognized command. Varin stepped forward. He did not know why. His boots cracked through layers of ash as he approached the chaplain. "Then tell me," he said, his voice quiet but clear through the vox. "Does he ever speak? To you, to anyone?" The crowd fell silent, their collective breath caught in disbelief. The chaplain turned his helm slowly. The The lenses glowed a deep, impenetrable red. "He speaks through duty," he replied, "through war, through obedience." "That's not an answer," Varen said. The chaplain's head tilted. "It is the only one that exists." The exchange ended there, but something irreversible had shifted. Varen looked at his brother stalwart, unflinching, perfect. He looked at the pilgrims broken, burning, hopeful. And then at the shrine itself, now complete, its lights flickering to life, one by one. The golden Aquila spread its wings above the crowd, casting long shadows across the ruin. The machine of faith had completed another cycle as the first hymn of consecration rose. Varen saw his reflection in the shrine's surfacer, towering silhouette haloed in artificial light. But the reflection warped, stretched, distorted. The man who stared back at him looked hollow. For the first time, he understood the truth. They had not been made to feel the Emperor's grace. They had been made to enforce it, to be the gears that kept belief turning, whether or not it still had meaning. The shrine's lights surged, burning brighter. His shadow stretched long across the ground, vast, sharp-edged, alone. It reached the altar and vanished beneath the boots of the faithful. And as the chanting resumed, drowning thought once more, Varen felt the silence inside him widen, until it was all that remained. The stars above had not changed in 1,000 years. Their cold light still spilled across the same broken worlds, touching the same bones buried beneath ash and glass. And yet to Captain Atheon, they seemed dimmer, somehow tired, like old sentinels who had watched too long. His armor, once resplendent, cobalt and gold, now bore the dull sheen of centuries. The machine spirits within whispered with the faint static of age, though he himself had not aged a day. Time moved around him like wind through a monument felt, but never suffered. He stood on the plains of Delphorix, where the earth was dark with the ghosts of the fallen. Here, his company had once clashed with a tide of orcs so vast it blotted out the horizon. That was 400 years ago. The grass that grew now was silver-grey, glimmering faintly under the light of twin moons. The wind carried the scent of iron and frost, and beneath it all the memory of Promethean fire. The manufacturum ruins still stood like broken ribs against the skyline, their spires reaching into a sky that no longer remembered war. Atheon did. He remembered every scream, every thunderous impact of bolt rounds, every prayer shouted over the roar of artillery. Memory was his curse. He could not forget, nor truly live anew. In the centuries since, empires had risen on these bones. Faithful pilgrims built shrines from shattered ceramite, naming them after victories Atheon barely recalled. They carved his name into marble and sang hymns of his courage, though none had ever met him. Once he found a mural painted on the wall of a cathedral depiction of himself, blade raised, haloed by fire. The artistry was magnificent, the emotion sincere, but the artist had been dead 3 centuries before Atheon ever saw it. The sight should have stirred pride. Instead, he felt something colder. Distance, the gulf between the man and the myth. He had tried, once, to count how many wars he had fought since the day of his awakening. He stopped after 7. Each campaign bled into the next, each victory carrying the same hollow triumph. There was no rest, no peace-only deployment, debrief, redeployment. His brothers changed, too, though their faces did not. Some grew quiet. Others prayed with desperate zeal, as if louder faith could drown eternity. And a few, like Atheon, simply endured. The Primaris were built for endurance, endless war, endless service. but no gene seed could shield the soul from the slow corrosion of meaning. Now, in the silence between crusades, the stillness felt heavier than any bombardment. The battlefields were gone, the enemies long since reduced to dust, and yet he remained standing sentinel over victories that had ceased to matter. Through the Voxnet, static whispers drifted from distant systems. Some spoke of the Indomitus fleets still burning across the stars. Others of Guilliman himself retreating into solitude, lost in the calculus of empire. Rumor, perhaps, or truth. Even demigods, it seemed, could falter beneath the weight of eternity. Atheon sometimes wondered if the Emperor's light reached him any more. The Astronomicon still burned, of that he was sure, the psychic beacon pulsing across the void, guiding fleets through madness. But what of the man upon the golden throne? The warriors of old had called him a god, the anchor of all purpose. Yet after so many centuries, Atheon had begun to suspect that the Emperor was not watching. Perhaps he never had. Perhaps they were all marching through an empire of echoes, fulfilling orders written in a language time itself had forgotten. He felt it most when he walked among relics of his own past. In the Hall of Triumph aboard the strike cruiser Unyielding Resolve, statues of his company lined the walls. Each was sculpted from black marble, polished until they gleamed like obsidian flame. He paused before one bearing his own likeness. The face was perfect, the same proud jaw, the same unyielding gaze. Atheon reached out, running his gauntlet fingers over the cold stone. It felt alien, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. "Captain," came a voice through his vox. It was Brother Ulrich, his oldest surviving sergeant. The chaplain's wish to renew the right of continuance. "They say the crusade fleets may soon call for us again." Atheon's eyes did not leave the statue. "And what do you wish, brother?" There was a long pause. "It does not matter what I wish. We are the Emperor's to command." The reply was flawless. Correct. It was everything they had been made to believe. But Atheon could hear the faint tremor beneath it, the weariness that even gene-forged flesh could not erase. When the vox clicked silent, the captain stood alone in the echoing hall, surrounded by immortal faces that would never fade, never falter, never die. The mural came to him again, the one painted by hands that had long since turned to dust. He could still see it in his mind, himself immortalized in victory, haloed by fire, standing over a slain enemy who no longer had a name. The artist had painted him as a god, but he was no god. He was a relica machine of flesh, preserved beyond meaning. Outside, the stars burned on, cold and endless, each one a candle lit for a war that never ended. Atheon turned away from his stone reflection and walked into the darkness of the corridor beyond, his footsteps echoing like the toll of a distant bell. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard something beneath the silencer whisper, low and human. But when he turned, there was nothing, only his shadow stretching long across the floor, fading into the light of eternity. The fortress monastery stood like a wound carved into the mountain's heart, its walls a fusion of marble and plasteel, its spires lost in the smoke of eternal incense. Here, silence was a form of worship, deep, absolute, and suffocating. The banners that hung from the vaulted ceilings bore names of wars older than memory, their edges frayed by centuries of recycled air. The Emperor's sigil burned faintly above the altar, not a light of hope, but a reminder of debt unpaid. Captain Atheon walked through those sacred halls with the sound of his footfalls echoing like distant gunfire. Each step felt heavier than the one before, as if the weight of his armor had become the weight of history itself. He came upon the Hall of Communion, where the walls shimmered faintly with the presence of hololithic projections, battle records, litanies, oaths of loyalty stored for eternity. In the center of the chamber stood a figure of gold, radiant even in the half-light. The custodes' emissary did not move as Atheon entered. He did not need to. Stillness was his dominion. Every inch of him spoke of precision, the impossible perfection of one who had stood at the Emperor's side when the stars still burned with promise. "You were summoned," the custodius said. His voice modulated through his vox grill, smooth as molten gold poured through iron. "You have endured. That is your purpose." Atheon bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect, though not reverence. "Endurance," he repeated, his tone hollow, a word that tastes of ash. The custodes regarded him without expression. To endure is to serve. You exist because the Emperor wills it, and if his will has forgotten us? The question escaped before Atheon could temper it. His words hung in the air like heresy, raw and irretrievable. The custodes' helm turned, the faintest motion of disapproval or pity Atheon could not tell. The Emperor does not forget. He does not need to remember. You were the act of his will, not the subject of his mind. It was an answer, but not a comfort. In that cold logic, Atheon heard something darker, that perhaps the Emperor's perfection lay in indifference. To create without love, to command without recognition, to preserve without mercy. The thought pressed into him like the mountains weighed above their heads. All around them, servitors moved in slow ritual, polishing the marble floors and whispering binary hymns to machine spirits that hummed in patient slumber. One knelt beside a wall-mounted reliquary, its steel fingers tracing the same motion over and over, a prayer of maintenance, devoid of meaning, but flawless in execution. Atheon watched it, transfixed. It was perfect obedience, eternal and empty, a reflection of his own kind. "Tell me, emissary," Atheon said at last, "do you ever question why you still serve?" The custodes' voice was calm, measured. To question purpose is to doubt perfection. "I was made to guard the master of mankind." "That is enough, is it?" The words slipped from Atheon like a confession. "You guard a corpse that rules an empire of dust. I fight for worlds that crumble faster than I can save them. If this is perfection, it feels more like punishment." For the first time, silence stretched between them. The hum of cogitators filled the void, joined by the faint clatter of distant servitor limbs. Then the custodes spoke, his tone softer, almost human. "Service is not reward, Captain. It is remembrance. You fight so others do not forget what he once was." Atheon turned away, his gaze tracing the golden figure's reflection in the marble floor. "Then why does it feel like we're the ones who've been forgotten?" The custodes gave no reply. His silence was not ignorance, it was doctrine. Atheon understood then that there would never be an answer, only continuation. Service unending, duty eternal, a cycle of obedience masquerading as devotion as he left the chamber. The light from the sanctum windows bled across his armor, gilding him for a moment in false divinity. The warmth of the light was a lie. It came from no sun, only the filtered glow of reactor fire deep within the fortress. The air smelled of oil and incense, sanctified machinery and decay. He paused before the great statue of the Emperor at the hall's end, vast, unmoving, unreachable. The eyes of the stone god seemed to stare beyond him, beyond all things, toward a horizon no mortal could see. Atheon felt a flicker of emotion he could not name. Fear, perhaps, or grief. The two had long become indistinguishable. In that moment, the fortress bell began to toll, slow, deep, resonant. Each note rolled through the corridors like the voice of time itself. With every strike, he felt it reverberate through his chest, through his armor, through the marrow of his gene-forged bones. It sounded not like a summons to prayer, but a reminder that even eternity has rhythm, a slow heartbeat echoing through the void. The Custodes had called it honor. Atheon could not hear it as anything but condemnation. The void hums with the slow pulse of the ship's plasma heart, a rhythm older than memory itself. The captain stands upon the observation deck, the void before him a cathedral of endless black. Through the reinforced glass, Terra gleams faintly, a distant ember adrift in the dark. The Astronomicon burns there, not as a sun, but as a wound in reality, its light thin, trembling, alive. It cuts across the abyss like a whisper of the divine, reaching every ship that dares to believe it still shines for them. For centuries, that light has guided him. Tonight, it feels like it looks back, around him. His warriors kneel in practiced reverence, each movement measured, mechanical. Their armor glints in the blue wash of the void lamps, the imperial aquila etched into ceramite-like scars on holy stone. Their voices rise in unity, a droning hymn to the master of mankind, carried through the vox grills with the precision of ritual. But behind the symmetry of their faith, there is no heartbeat. Only echo, only obedience. The captain does not kneel. He listens not to the chant, but to what hides between the words. The silence there feels alive, almost aware, as if the emperor himself pauses to hear what his sons have become. He remembers the wars that never ended, the banners raised, the ashes falling on worlds whose names have long since been erased. He remembers the smell of promethium in the air, the grinding of bolter fire, the taste of dust and iron, and he remembers faces, thousands of them, men who fought and died beneath his command, who never knew they were part of a story too vast to be told. Each memory flickers like a candlelight, brief, trembling, dying. Yet he cannot let them go as he stares toward the Astronomicon. He wonders if it burns for them still, for those who fought and were forgotten, or does it burn only for duty, blind and eternal? Rumor says the light is dimmed, that the golden throne hungers more each year, that the emperor's silence has grown colder than the void. The captain does not know if it is true. He only knows that he can no longer feel the warmth it once carried. Perhaps faith, too, fades when stretched across eternity. He unseals his helm. The hiss of depressurization cuts through the chant like a blade. His breath fogs in the cold air, human and fragile. His face, scarred and ageless, reflects faintly in the glass, a ghost staring back at itself. He realizes he no longer remembers when his reflection last looked like a man. His warriors falter in their prayer, unsure if they should stop. He raises a hand, silent command. The chanting ceases. The ship's engines fill the void left behind, deep and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. And then, with no ceremony, the captain begins to speak. He speaks names. One by one, some are ancient heroes of long-forgotten crusades. Others are recent lives, extinguished in battles that barely warranted report. Each name drifts through the ship's vox, carried across the endless dark. A litany of the dead whispered into the silence of the stars. His voice does not waver, though his throat burns. There are too many names, too many ghosts. The machine spirits of the Vox crackle as if straining. Beneath their weight, the custodes emissary had once told him that remembrance was not duty, but burden that the emperor remembers so that his sons need not. The captain had believed him once. Now he knows better. Immortality without memory is not service. It is exile. And tonight he refuses to forget. The last name leaves his lips, soft as breath. The silence that follows is total. No him, no orders. Only the quiet hum of eternity. Outside the viewport, the Astronomicon flares faintly, almost imperceptibly. For a moment, its light seems to bend, glinting off his armor not as command, but acknowledgement. Perhaps it is coincidence. Perhaps it is faith. Or perhaps the dead, at last, have been heard. The captain closes his eyes. For the first time in centuries, he feels peace. Not the peace of victory, but of surrender. The kind mortals earn, and immortals are forever denied. Somewhere deep within the ship, a single bell tolls long, low, final. Its sound drifts into the void, a heartbeat refusing to die. The light fades. The stars remain.